Good morning.
Good morning.
Big crowd today.
Probably out working in the yard. It's such a nice morning.
True. Okay, well today we're talking about a lot of people's favorite fruits. Not the general population perhaps, but certainly a lot of the ethnic groups like these fruits. We'll go alphabetically today. So we'll start with the jujube. Now, all of these trees, just so you know, are perfect in our climate in that they don't need much or any winter chill. So a little bit of winter to knock the leaves off, a little bit of coolness to knock the leaves off in the fall, and they're all set to make fruit. We kind of experienced this during the last 5 years when we had a couple of the warmest winters we've ever seen. And we noticed that the jujubes, the persimmons, and the mulberries all did better and better the less winter we had. Now, the books do mention that most of these in the world, around the world, they're related to plants that are coming from the tropics. So they have tropical origin, so they probably don't really need the winter to do anything. They can survive the winter by going to sleep, but they don't really require the winter to do much. So jujube, there's species all throughout the northern continents. In California, there are some related plants. The California buckthorn, we call them. Italy, there's the Italian buckthorn. They make little tiny berries that the birds like. Too small for us generally. This jujube, the main one that we sell, comes from China. In China, they said they've been growing them for probably 4,000 years. They say that it's possible that the Chinese jujube originated in Syria and was brought to China a way long time ago, but the Chinese people have been growing it commercially, they said, at least 2,500 years. And most of those years, they said they're used more for herbal medicine. The fruit is full of micronutrients and things, special nutrients that they use a lot for treating illnesses. Of course, people didn't know about, how nutrition we needed a long time ago. So they were using this a lot for nutritional purposes. In the older days, the fruit tended to be more tart. In the last few thousand years, they've probably chosen more of the sweet ones. And jujube made it to the United States around 1900. They brought the sweeter varieties over here to grow. As far as the size of the tree, when you see them in people's yards, they're usually about 10 to 12 foot, maybe 15 foot max. They can grow 20 to 30 foot, but it takes quite a while. They're not real fast growers, and most people just keep them cut short. And one of the unique things about jujube is that it fruits on new growth. There's not many trees that fruit on new growth. In other words, if you were to cut a mulberry tree down to the ground, it won't fruit for a year. If you cut a persimmon tree down to a stump, it won't fruit for a year. They have to fruit on wood that grew the last year. Jujubes, they said in some of the poorer areas, they harvest the fruit, maybe 20 pounds of fruit per tree per year, and then they cut off the foliage 2 weeks later and feed it to their cattle. And then in the wintertime, they cut their tree down to a stump and sell it for firewood. So back in the 90s, I had a 10-foot jujube in my backyard. I said, let's try this. Let's see if that actually works. So we cut it down to 18 inches. It was about 10 foot high. Cut it down to 18 inches. And by the next summer, it was back up to about here, full of flowers and fruit. So this is one tree that's easy to control size. You just cut it down every winter. Although we recommend not cutting it too real thick. In other words, most plants you do less damage. Let's say if you did have a short stub in the winter and it grows like this that year, it grows back 6-8 foot. Don't cut it below where you cut it before. Try to cut it in the smaller diameter wood, and then you won't do as much damage as you would if you just stumped it.
And you only want the one branch coming up. If you have a sucker coming
Uh,
up,
it-
should you leave that or cut it?
Well, they do make suckers, so this thing's grafted. Jujubes are grafted, and they're somewhat difficult to graft. On this particular jujube, it's grafted right here. Most fruit trees, they only graft a single bud onto it. So in other words, they take the rootstock, which is a trunk, slit a hole in there and slide in one bud. They call that bud grafting. Most fruit trees are done that way. Jujubes don't take well that way. So here they took a piece of branch 3 inches long and grafted to the trunk down there. So jujubes are more expensive because they can't, instead of using just single buds, they have to take the entire branch to do it. So they can't graft that many jujubes that efficiently. So jujubes, well, both jujubes and persimmons, by far are most expensive bare-root fruit trees we buy in. So they tend to be the most expensive fruit trees we sell, in fact. Except for some of the real exotic stuff. These are pretty high-priced plants. They are easy to grow, and they do sucker from the root. So that's one bad thing about jujubes is the rootstock tends to make little trees around it that come up. Now, if you only plant one jujube tree and you don't let any suckers form, they're only partially self-fertile. So when I had a single jujube tree in the house, all the books say they're self-fertile, except for the newest ones. I think they're getting the message that they're not truly self-fertile totally. So when I had one at my house, I would cut off all the suckers to clean it up. And my tree, at being about 10 foot tall and 4 foot wide, was only making about 50 a year. I'm going, well, the ones that are store make more than that on a tree 1/10 the size. So I figured that must need a pollinator. So I took another tree home, and lo and behold, it made a lot more fruit, made 300 fruit instead of just 50. So we know they need cross pollinators. However, what goes on in orchards is they don't clean up all the suckers. So if you get a sucker growing out of the ground, even 3 or 4 inches high, it blooms. Real tiny flowers. The flowers on jujubes are only about 1/4 inch wide. They're greenish, small flowers. But the suckers bloom, like the moment they sprout, they come up out of the ground. And so the suckers can pollinate the top of the tree since they're genetically different plants. So we think in an orchard situation, no one's cleaning up the suckers totally, and the trees get pollinated by the sucker flowers. So, if you don't like suckers, don't plant jujubes because they do sucker. And they can sucker distance. The roots can grow 20 foot one direction, and 10 years later the suckers come out of the ground 20 foot away. Now, most of the suckers, they're grown from seed. The rootstock is grown from seed. So most of the fruit that the suckers will make will only be about as big as a marble. But because it's a seed-grown plant, you never know. You might end up with a big one that's actually pretty good. Now this is one of the larger jujubes out there. This is called, let me write the name down.
So you pick the green out when it's green, or you have to wait until it turns to red?
Okay, well, jujubes are ripe when they're about half this brown color. Some jujubes, like Lang, they tell you to.
I bought a sample because I wasn't sure if that.
Yes, well, this one is about ripe. I'd probably let it get just a hair more brown, maybe half brown. Once they're totally brown, they're perfectly ripe, but a lot of times they start getting dry at that time, and they start to shrivel. So they're not. I like them fresh. They're like a real tender, crispy apple with an apple flavor and about 2 or 3 times sweeter. One seed in the middle, normally about the size of a date seed. And this is kind of the average size, although we have seen them up to about the size of a chicken egg, or as small as a marble. So there's quite a few different sizes. I think they said in China there's 400 named varieties, so there's quite a few of them. So the ones they brought over to the United States first were Lee and Lang, and this looks like a Lee.
It is.
Yeah. So Lee is more or less shaped like that, and Lang is shaped like this. Lang doesn't ripen well off the tree. You got to make sure it's brown before you pick it. Lee generally tastes good, no matter when you pick it. Don't pick it too early, but it's generally, once it starts to turn this color, it's pretty darn good, and it will ripen somewhat off the tree. So those two were brought 1908 or whatever it was when what was his name? I think Dr. Meyer brought them from China to America. He went around the world and brought a lot of things. Meyer lemon is named after him. But I'm pretty sure he's the one who brought Li and Lang from China too. And for almost a century, these were #1 sellers. But recently, in the last 20 years, they've been collecting others. And this Shaanxi Li, which was just brought from China a number of years ago, is considered 50% larger than the Li. Now, it takes them about 3 years in the ground to get their biggest fruit. So this one being in a pot, the fruit's only about this big right now, but it's supposed to get about 50% larger than the Li. But even Li, under the best conditions, get the size of a chicken egg. So they get a decent size. Now we heard, I don't know if it's true, that back in the 1700s and 1800s, the fruit was processed for the sugar because it's so high in sugar, like up to 30% or more, and that's what they made the jujube candy out of. The sugar processed from the jujube fruit, but I haven't seen that written more than once, so it might not be true. That the jujube candy may not be related to the fruit at all. Yes.
Can you keep it in a large pot?
Yes, it is. Yeah, they feel pretty good in pots. So this one is at least a year older than that one. This one's called Candy Cane. It's one of the newer ones. It might be a little sweeter, but the fruit is definitely smaller. It's about that big. So a lot of these sweetest ones, and a lot of different fruits, same thing. A lot of the small fruits taste sweeter because it's more concentrated. They're just smaller fruit. Sugar cane. A couple years ago, one called Honey Jar came out, which was even smaller. But most people will tell you that's the sweetest one they've ever eaten, but they're really small. Chico State, University of California State University, whatever it's called, had one that was called GA 866. He never gave it a real name. And back in the 80s, this was considered the sweetest one. It was shaped about like this. Decent size. But now they have one coming out this next year called Chico State, so we'll have to see how that one tastes compared to the GA866, unless it's the same thing. We're not sure. They haven't given us a description of that Chico State one yet. Yeah, Chico. They're called Chico. We're not positive we're getting it. It says subject to availability on 2 of these. And unfortunately, in the last few years, there have been 3 major bearwood suppliers of fruit trees in Southern California for the last 50 years, and 2 out of 3 went out of business in the last 5 years. So we're down to 1 left, and hopefully Dave Wolsters, you can supply us with everything. So they're trying. So we're due to get Honey Jar, Lee, Shaanxi Lee, and Sugar Cane. Possibly Chico, and possibly GA866. There are a few others. I mean, they do well in the deep south. So out of Louisiana, there's one called Sherwood, but we don't know if we'll ever have a source for that again. And that was another big one. And the nice thing about Sherwood was that it was late ripening. So right now is the main season, which jujubes don't all ripen at the same time. So most of ours have ripened already, but you can see this one still has a few left. So they ripen over about a month and a half, 2 months. Sherwood would always come in around November in my backyard, so it's a very, very late variety, but whether or not we'll see it ever again, well, I don't know if another supplier's gonna pick that one up or not. And generally, they're all very sweet. It's not like you need to have the sweetest one. To me, I planted the biggest ones. I planted Sherwood and Lee because I thought the small ones were just, to me, were just too small. So I just went for size, even though the smaller ones tend to be the sweeter ones. But to me, you don't have to have the sweetest thing in the world to enjoy it. Sometimes they have partially developed seeds. So as they get older, they may produce fruit without any pollination at all if they're making those part seeds. I don't like the part seeds, so they're hard to detect. So I'd rather have the full size seeds myself. Now the nice thing about jujubes, very few pests. We've never treated them for anything.
How about fertilizer, or how do you fertilize, or do you need to?
Nothing special. Yeah, so fertilize them, but nothing that unusual on them. Water-wise, they're drought plants, however, they need ample water for a crop, just like any other fruit thing.
How about sun?
More sun, better flavor. And it goes true with just about any fruit tree, although it's interesting, when they did a study on citrus, and it might hold true for all the fruit trees, because all fruit trees have a north side. And they said on citrus, they take the fruit off the south side, take off the north side, taste test them, and they couldn't tell any difference. But when they analyzed them, the fruit on the south side had almost twice as much sugar and acids in it than the ones on the north side. Even though they tasted the same, the south side ones were much more loaded with nutrients. So that may hold true for a lot of fruit trees, I don't know.
The larger jujube that you've got there, is that sun and heat damage on those leaves near the top from this summer?
Yeah, generally these love the heat, so you can grow these in Palm Desert or Las Vegas. In fact, they love Las Vegas. It's almost like their native climate. It's just that this year went from June bloom to 115 degrees in 1 week, and the plants were in a growth mode that wasn't going to take that heat. So just about everything burnt. Couldn't help it. That's the quickest transition. Usually you get those extreme heat waves in September. The plants are ready. But when they come right around the 4th of July, they're not ready yet. So a lot of the brown you see on everything is from that one episode of heat, or 2 days in a row. Okay. That's got everything on jujube. So we do have just Shanxi Lee and Lee left. And generally we say Lee is the best one to start with. If you want to get one jujube, get the Lee. That's been around a long time. It's done well. It's got big fruit. The mulberry. Mulberries pretty much are native all around the world too. It's almost too big to drag over.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah.
Well, there's 2 species that we usually carry. So the biggest one there, the botanically name for mulberry is Morris. The big one is an Alba, which is the white mulberries from China. The white mulberries are used to grow the caterpillars and moths that create silk. And then the one that has, quote, the best tasting fruit, to most people, it's Morris nigra. Of course, that means black mulberry. and those are from further east, more or less the Middle East area, Morris nigra, and this would be a Morris nigra here. The silkworm caterpillars can still eat it, but it's not their favorite. They'd rather have the white mulberry over there. Now there's a lot of versions of each one. So all the mulberries, there's a red mulberry that's native to the southeast United States, but all of these come in all different colors. So this is a black Persian mulberry. Now black Persian mulberry, by many people, is considered the best tasting. That one's called Black Beauty. The fruit's about that size. It tastes like a blackberry, so it's a nice blackberry flavor, which means it's tart and sweet, real dark. They form in the axils of each leaf. You get one or more in each axil of each leaf. So that's considered top flavored mulberry. This is a white Persian. So it's the same as the black one, but it's white. And it's already pretty tall. That's over 10 feet.
Yeah.
So now what they do a lot is they use the white mulberry as the rootstock, because the white mulberry is easy to propagate. And that does make the mulberries tend to grow faster. The white mulberry, the natural white mulberry generally grows 30 to 50 foot tall very quickly and then just stops. The black mulberries tend to only grow to 25, and they're slower to do it. The Black Beauty is only a 15-footer, so this Black Beauty, and I have some grafted on taller trunks too out there. You can almost call it a mulberry bush.
How do you harvest it when it's so high up? Or they just drop?
You have to pick them by hand, yeah. So you have to prune them to keep it small enough to pick. Because mulberries are not only really good, they're like blackberries. They'll break in your hands as you pick them. So you get really messy. You have to be very gentle with them. So Black Beauty has been our best seller. Then we had mentioned the white Persian. So these are the Morris nigra. Now the white mulberries, we don't normally sell the regular white mulberry just because it grows 30 to 50 foot. It is not that easy to stop. The one we tend to grow is one called Pakistan. So the regular white mulberry, the original one, fruit's smaller and real light color. Now there are dark colored white mulberries too. The Pakistan mulberry is unique in that the fruit on it is about skinny, but it's really long. You know, it's like 4 inches, 5 inches long on a mature tree. This tree here, another tall one, well, that's the white mulberry. That's a white Pakistan. And that one, the fruit on that one, now 3 to 4 inches on the white Pakistan. The darker there's a white Pakistan and there's a darker Pakistan that gets even longer fruit. The main difference between, well, the main reason that Pakistans become popular is even the dark fruit ones, the fruit doesn't stain. So the black one, if it falls on the ground and you step on them and you start tracking the black stuff all around, or if the birds eat them and they poop on your chairs or eat the berries on your outdoor furniture, everything starts turning real dark. It goes away after a while, but it makes everything look dark. The Pakistan mulberry, even the dark colored ones, don't do that. They don't bring out the color. Now the red Pakistan or the dark colored Pakistan has always been a difficult one to get, mainly because the bare root growers note that it's kind of delicate. When you pull it out of the ground, a lot of them die. So they have to leave them in the ground for an extra year, so they charge a lot for those. Now, of course, they buy the plants in from another propagator to do it. So we found the propagator, so we decided instead of getting in, well, we were getting in the bigger bare roots also, but this year we also got the plants that were this big. This is how these growers start these things. They buy these little tiny plants from the growers, probably tissue culture grown, and then they grow them in the ground for 2 years or 3 years before they pull them out, bare root, and sell them to us at something, you know, this size. I mean, what we were getting in stock, the trunks were about 2 inches in diameter. Well, yeah, 2 inches in diameter. Really big trunks. Could say survive the pulling out of the ground. Well, if you get them this way, you're not going to pull them out of the dirt, so there's no shock on this one. But it probably will take 2 years before this one fruits because it's so skinny.
Because it comes out of seed or
No, they still do it from tissue culture. Tissue culture is when you take a few cells of this plant and you grow it in a petri dish, and then you multiply those until you make little plants. That's the fastest way of multiplying plants is by tissue culture. We think this tissue culture, we can't see a cutting or anything at the base of it, so we're pretty sure that the growers didn't buy tissue culture. It's coming out of a lab in Florida that does a lot of this work. Because they're sending us things that normally have real big trunks and we're getting them real tiny. So tissue culture is one way to do things. Sometimes it alters them slightly. The color, not usually the flavor, but the color, the size of the fruit. Sometimes that's altered from the tissue culture techniques. But
Does that represent one season's growth then?
no. These became available in August. They told us that they'd be ready in August to sell. We don't know when they started them.
Okay.
So, because we got them in little pots about that big around. So they came in real small pots. And we've been growing them for a few months now. They're not really ready to transplant yet, but if you want a Pakistan mulberry now for $17 instead of $60, I think it's bare root price. But you gotta wait, one extra year, essentially. By the time winter rolls around, this thing will probably be about 3 foot tall. And by next year from now, it'll be probably 10 foot tall, but still maybe not produce fruit quite yet. Because when we get them bare root, the plants are like 10 foot, but there's like 4 or 5 trunks on them. They're huge when we get them. We still don't get 100% take on the mulberries that way. The Pakistan does not like to be pulled out, ripped out of the ground that way. But anyway, we have quite a few of these. We actually brought in about 70 of them, so they're scattered around the nursery right now. So if you want a Pakistan mulberry, now Pakistan does want to be at least 30 by 30. And it's hard to pick that, so you have to prune these things. Now, you can't, they bear on second year growth. So if you look at any mulberry, this thing started this branch right here this year, and it's gone 3 foot. The Pakistan can do 15 foot in 1 year.
That's amazing.
But to get food on this plant, you can't cut it down to below where it started. You have to save some of this growth. Now the branches that come off of each of these buds down here will have fruit on them. At least for a short length of branch, they'll have fruit on them. So this one, you know, if you wanted to keep this one really small, yeah, every year you can save just 6 or 8 inches of that branch on all the branches. Or the ones that are real short down here, don't have to even cut them, and they'll make fruit off of those branches next year. The thicker branches being the better ones to save. You know, all the skinny stuff, you might just take it off. It's not going to fruit. But something like this can fruit this coming year. So the Pakistan mulberry, a friend of mine, now I've grown it too. I mean, I can't believe how fast the Pakistan can grow. So in the ground at my house, it wanted to be 30 foot. So I take my chainsaw to it twice here. In July, take the chainsaw and cut the branches back after it fruited, cutting off about 10 or 12 foot of growth. And then by the end of the year, I have to do the same thing. 10 or 12 foot of growth again. Thing just wants to be up there, wants to be at least 20, 25 foot tall, no matter what you do to it. But a friend of mine is determined to keep his right around 7 or 8 foot. He's determined. So in his backyard, it's no higher than this. He says he's pruning it constantly, but the more you prune it, the more fruit you get. So what we found out on mulberries is that these buds are actually ready right at this point. They're not going to open up because this leaf is putting out a hormone that keeps that sleeping. But if you strip all the leaves off of this branch so there's no more hormones affecting the buds, all the buds open up, grow, bloom, make fruit. So you can make it crop more than once a year, we found out. We found that out by accident because someone had taken a, now this is not the weeping fruiting one, this is a male tree here that's brought it in. We get females of that one too. Should mention, okay, mulberries are males and females. The males don't make fruit, they just make a lot of pollen. And the females make the fruit. The male fruiting ones are the fruitless mulberries that you see at every elementary school. They have to have the mulberry there, the white male mulberry there, and they get the leaves off to feed the silkworms in the classrooms. So all the schools generally have the male ones. There's so much male pollen around, you don't have to bother buying a male mulberry, you just need the female. Because the male mulberry pollen is so prevalent all over the United States. In the springtime, there's no way you never need to get a male. I said it's one of the problems with asthma is mulberry pollen. They consider the female mulberry trees to be, like on the scale of pollen 1 to 10, 10 being worst, they consider males a 10, way up there. The females are considered a -1 because they capture the pollen out of the air. So they're actually taking the pollen out of the air. So it's interesting. But so there are male and female trees. That's the male version of the weeping mulberry. But someone had bought the weeping one from us, took it home, planted the ground as bare root. When the fruit formed, they said, we don't like this one. So they pulled it out and brought the tree back to us and wanted to get something else. We're going, okay, this thing's going to die. but we'll go ahead and give them something else. We put the tree back in a pot. All the leaves fell off. It was in shock. But 2 weeks later, the whole thing bloomed and made another crop. We're going, oh, this is interesting. Made a new set of leaves in the middle of August, new crop in the middle of August. It normally was June ripening. We're going, okay, I got to try this on my mulberry at my house. So I took one of my big Pakistan, which is 20 foot tall, took one branch, stripped all leaves off. 2 weeks later, bloom, made another crop. And we did that 3 times that year. I think we got 4 crops on one branch by stripping all the leaves off. So instead of this one crop a year, so it seems like they're programmed to grow as long as the weather's warm and there's no leaves making hormones that shut the buds down. So if there's no leaves on it, all these buds, if it's warm, are growing. They'll grow and make their next crop. Once we get to winter, everything just shuts down. It gets too cold to grow. But if there's no leaves on it and the weather's warm, so we know that, like on the white mulberries, that big one, it'll wake up in December if it's decently warm. If all the leaves are off, if we have a warm spell in December, it's waking up, it's blooming, it's doing its thing, and it has its crop as early as April. The Persian mulberries seem to need more warmth. They don't normally wake up until May. It's got to be like 80 degrees for these to wake up, so they stay sleeping, whereas the white mulberry seem to wake up when it's just 70. So
The weeping one, is that a black or
it's a white mulberry.
It's considered white.
Yeah.
And how large is it get?
About 2 foot taller than that and about as wide as you let it grow. So what they did on that one, supposed to get these on the camera so people see what we're talking about. So on this one, they put a 5-foot white mulberry, regular white mulberry trunk on this that's going straight up. And then they graft a couple of buds off of the weeping version and they just come straight down. So in nature, this thing would just be on the ground, this weeping one. But that's not good if you want fruit, it'd just be all over the ground. So they put a 5-foot trunk on it and then graft on top of that. Now the new growth on this one will come arch out and then come down, arch out and come down. A friend of mine who has one that's about 10 years old, you can, about 5 or 6 adults can stand underneath the tree picking the fruit from the inside. Disneyland and Disney World have had, I think they grow the fruitless ones over there. The fruitless one's called chaparral. The one that makes fruit is called Tea's Weeping. They might be growing the fruiting one, I'm not sure. I think they grow the fruitless version, which is this chaparral. But the book says this can make it to maybe 15 foot, but I haven't seen one that big, although in Hemet, we saw one from a distance, and we don't know if it was the fruiting one or the fruitless one. But the tree was in the middle of a yard, and the homeowner had let it do this. It covered about 50, 60 foot of the yard. They didn't prune anything, so it just kept, staircasing itself across the yard like that. So it's like ground cover.
And that's fruiting?
We couldn't see, it was too far away, but we passed it on a way to a relative's house in Hemet.
But obviously that style can fruit.
The fruiting female ones, so there's a male and a female on that. So the weeping one is Tea's Weeping. And figure about 8 foot by 8 foot. Most children's gardens, like Huntington Gardens, they've got a weeping one. I'm pretty sure it's not a fruiting one. Usually the fruiting one is just too messy. So this winter we're getting in some more of the black beauties and bare root. The Pakistans, we're not sure, it's subject to availability, but we have these. We have the younger ones, and we are getting some of the Tea's Weeping mulberries at fruit.
Fruit. How much will they be?
$60 for the Tea's Weeping.
In a pot, or bare root?
Bare root.
Bare root.
And once you put them in a pot, they're like 130.
Okay.
We haven't really treated mulberries for pests. They can get whitefly, so when we had the giant Hawaiian fly invasion in the late 90s, they would get them. Wouldn't really do much to them. On all these fruit trees, keep the ants out of them. The ants bring scale, bugs. So we have seen a little bit of scale on this, on the mulberries and on the persimmon, so keep the ants off them. But other than that, there's not much going on.
What is your favorite tool for keeping ants off? Favorite?
Oh, there's a product on the shelf back there called Amdro. Called Amdro Ant Block. Most people will tell you that's the best ant control they've ever seen. Most people will, in an average yard, will not see ants ever again. They use it once in a while. I mean, one of our customers who had a real bad problem says he used it once and hasn't seen ants for years now. And the same thing happened at my house. Used it once, maybe twice in 1 year, and then next 5 years, not a single ant. It wipes out all the colonies in the area, it seems.
I've noticed this year that the ants are really tiny, much tinier than I've ever seen.
Different
them. I don't know
species.
why.
Yeah, there's very few ants that are native here. The main native one is the dark harvester ant and the red fire ant, the big red fire ant. But all the other ants seem to be imports. Not supposed to be here.
The fruit though, it will come from here.
Yeah, so these buds at the base of each leaf can make flowers and fruit next year. Although this plant may be a little small yet. Mulberry seem to have to get some thickness to the trunk. It might, this one, so I would say this one may make fruit next year, it may not. Needs some thickness. Whereas, when we get the weeping mulberries in, they've got such a fat trunk on them that they usually produce, they're the only ones that really produce first year really well, the weeping ones. All the rest of them seem to take 1 or 2 years in the ground. Let's see if you can see it well enough. We'll use this cardboard here for the last page. Persimmon.
Back to mulberry for one moment, if you
Sure.
would please speak about the fertilization and water requirements.
Oh, that's a good one. If you put them in the ground, after the first year, you probably need not to water them or fertilize them ever again. They have extensive roots that'll find everything they need. So it's like, yeah, in my yard, after the first year, I just forgot about ever watering fertilizers. They just grow so fast. Now they have what are called invasive roots. Doesn't mean they lift things up. It just means they take over that area of the yard, so it's difficult to grow flowers or anything because they're sucking that ground dry.
But the root is at the surface and not deep.
Well, all plants tend to be in the top foot of soil. There's nothing
Top
grows
foot.
deep.
Okay.
So, but they're just all over. So if you have a mulberry tree in the ground for a few years, you put a shovel in the ground next to it about 2 feet away, all you get are mulberry roots. They're small and they're not lifting anything up, but they're all over. So it's hard to get anything else to grow in there unless it's a really sturdy plant like a mulberry or like an India hawthorn or something really strong.
Bromeliads? Don't
Probably
have much of a
big,
root
right.
structure.
Bromeliads are probably big. Or else you compensate by water, because the mulberry tree wants a lot of water. But if you go to Hemet, Riverside, San Bernardino, you'll see mulberry trees all over in empty lots. Nobody's taking care of them. They just find they just do their root thing and they survive on the natural rainfall. So, like figs and mulberries, which are related, they got powerful roots too, so they can find what they need.
So there's not much of a difference with the draping variety versus the uprights as far as water and fertilizer? Same applies to the weeping variety?
Pretty much, yeah. So the weeping one stays the smallest. The Black Beauty is the next smallest, and it's easy to control because it doesn't grow 15 foot a year. It only grows maybe, that one's about 4 feet this year.
So if you put that in the pot, you have to fertilize it.
Yeah, in a container, you've got to water feed it. Although they're not as sensitive as some plants, like apple trees, you miss a day and they might get burn tips. Mulberries are hardier.
Best time of the year to pruning? Best time of the year for pruning mulberries?
Well, if you're trying to keep them small all year, start about mid-year and then all through summer and fall. If you're trying
It
to
won't
keep
be
them short.
affected if it's, let's say, midsummer.
Well, they're okay on mulberries. Most of the crop's done by midsummer. They're done fruiting that first crop. The white mulberries fruit earlier, so they're April through June, and the black mulberry comes in June, July. And if you cut it at that time, a lot of times you induce that second crop. So that's not a problem. I mean, the first time I grew mulberries, only got the one crop a year, and then we noticed, hey, strip the leaves off, you get another crop, another crop, another crop. So might as well do that, or a year is so long. And I will mention, I have one customer who told me they have a Pakistan mulberry in their yard they bought from us. And they sell most of their fruit because it says it's way too much to a local Persian market. And says he makes over $100 a year selling his fruit to the local Persian market. Because there's no commercial production really of that berry because it doesn't ship very far. Yes.
We got one Pakistan mulberry in your backyard last year. It's already bearing fruit. So when we get home, we thought it's a so small pot and we're bearing fruit. So we transfer to a big that whiskey pot we got
Mhm.
from you.
Half
that-
barrel.
But after we transplant to that, only a few more and didn't grow any this year. So and the leaf, we don't know it's too much water or too less water. It's usually look kind of curly. So we don't know it's too much or too less.
Well, we water them freely. We don't ever hold back on mulberries.
This is we put in the tennis court. So we water, but is that too much or too less? Or
Well, I would say it doesn't hurt a plant to water too much. If it's in a pot and you're watering it, you never can overwater. There's no such thing as overwatering in a pot unless you've got somebody else's potting soil that's rotting in there.
just originally it grew very beautiful fruit. Actually, it's already bearing many, so we pick up from your backyard. And we got home, it's continue to grow some more. But after we transplant,
Water more.
to a much larger whiskey barrel,
Well, make sure, hopefully your whiskey barrel is draining. It's got holes in it, right?
yeah, you drill 5 of it, right?
I don't recall. I
Yeah.
didn't work on your project. But if it's got holes in it, then you can't overwater it. So there's no such thing.
But I put landscaping fabric in the bottom because I put in the tennis court.
Well, make sure it's draining. As long as you water and water comes out the bottom, you're good. Because we've seen some plants where the roots clog up all the holes and it won't drain and then they die in there.
We just don't know what's the reason why it don't grow this year. And last year did it grow well?
Well, there are some possibilities too. There's that new bug out there called the chili thrip. And right now, the chili thrip is doing a lot of damage on new growth on almost any plant you can think of, especially roses, making all the new growth turn brown. But we've seen it on mulberries doing damage, grapes, guavas, fig trees, where all the new growth just shrivels up and falls off. So it could be a chili thrip attack, but I don't know.
Is
I
there
haven't
not
seen
any
it.
sign of a pest or something?
Well, chili thrips, you normally can't see them. They're about the size of a small sliver, and all you see is the fact that the leaves have all dried up on the ends. So, I don't know, but I would say generally you can probably find next year.
Thank you.
Okay, persimmon trees, they're actually native throughout the world, and they've come from the tropics too. The famous one in the tropics is the tree they harvest for wood called ebony. That's a type of persimmon. Persimmon botanically is diosporous. And ebony is diosporous ebonastrum, so it's got a real dark wood. The Fuyu persimmon is generally the persimmon of choice for most people. And it's got fruit that's kind of flat, like a tomato flat. These did get sunburned by that heat wave, but it looks like they'll finish and ripen okay. But now all I have left on persimmons are funny shaped ones. Our more pretty trees sold about in the springtime, but these are still healthy. Persimmons tend to be one of the most difficult tree. Well, let's put it this way: when we get bare root in, we tend to lose about 10% of the trees or more. Don't wake up or don't make it. They just don't make it. And this year with the heat, that didn't help them either. So their root system is kind of delicate when the guys plow them out of the ground. A lot of them have messed up roots. They don't get enough root out of the ground. They're very brittle roots. So a lot of times they snap off too close to the trunk and we're not getting the entire root system out. So they do have some troubles versus, mulberries, I would say 1% loss. Jujubes may be 2 or 3% loss. But the persimmons, we tend to lose about up to 10% of them every year, and sometimes more than that. So a little difficult to get started. Once they're started, they're fine. They are very picky about their dirt. So jujubes, mulberries can care less what you plant them in. You can plant them in pure ground up wood and they'll make it. Jujubes maybe a little bit more sensitive, but persimmons, you get regular potting soil around, the leaves turn yellow and red and they fall off and the plant dies. And we see that all the time. People tell us that they got a persimmon from someone else and never grew. And they have suckers coming out of the ground. Well, suckers to me tells me that the original root system died and the top of the plant died and all that's left are suckers coming out of the ground. And we used to have the same problem too before we fixed our soil to make sure there's no ground up dead trees in it. So now we expect them to do pretty well, and we expect the leaves to be nice color, nice green color. And at least they've done that.
Can you keep them in the pot then if it's difficult to?
No, they're pretty easy. Once they're started, they're fine. So they're easy plants to grow. It's just the fact that the transition from bare root to your house is difficult. Once we get them started, they're fine after that. And they're good in pots.
They are good pots. How big do they get?
30, 40 feet in 30 to 40 years. They're not fast. They tend, once they start production, it really slows them down. I mean, I had a persimmon in my yard. First year it was this tall, it had 2 fruit. Second year was this tall, it had 25. Third year was not much taller, it had 75. And the branches were just hitting the ground. It was just so loaded, the thing never got higher than 5 feet. I had another persimmon that didn't produce a single fruit for 3 years, but it was 10 by 10 by then. And then it made 150 fruit for its first crop. So, and then after that, it wouldn't grow anymore because it was fruiting so heavily when it got to that stage. So they're noted for their real heavy production, and that production has stunts them severely. Now the ones that are not flat like this, the main one, so the flat ones are called fuyu type persimmons. Now no one sells the original fuyu type persimmon anymore because the original quote fuyu had seeds in it. Slightly brown where the seeds were, the flesh was. Inside generally it's orange, outside and inside. But the original fuyu had seeds in the middle, slightly brown flesh around. No one sells that version anymore. So all these are kind of offspring. This one is a Emoto. Now, the one most common fuyu sold in the United States is called a Jiro. And they call it Jiro fuyu, but actually it's, it's not fuyu anymore, it's Jiro because it's genetically totally different. And then we also have this Emoto. Those have been the two we've sold the most on the fuyu types, both seedless. Now what's funny is that both me and my dad like the Emoto better than Jiro. But now that we found out how they originated, it's like, okay, we know why now. So we do a taste test. We pick the fruit off of the Emoto and pick it off of Jiro. We always liked Emoto better. Well, it turns out Emoto was just a sport off of Jiro, so genetically identical, that ripened 2 weeks earlier. So the ones we're eating, the Emotos were just riper than the Jiros. So we always liked the Emoto better. But apparently there's not much difference at all between them. They're genetically identical, essentially. So now we don't care anymore which one we sell. Emoto, Jiro ripens later.
So this one is the
Emoto.
Emoto.
And our current supplier no longer, let's see if they're growing it. I don't know if they're growing that anymore. Because the supplier who introduced it went out of business. No, Dave Wilson picked it up. So we're getting some Emotos and some Jiros in this year.
How much do they,
These are listed at 139, but we're selling the last of them for 100 each because they're not as nice as the earlier ones were. The bare root ones will be about $60. The jujubes will be about the same. They're expensive plants. Yeah, $60 for jujubes, bare root. So those are our most expensive fruit trees, bare root.
I have a friend who has the Fuji in the backyard. It's a really big tree, pretty old, but it has seeds, so that's the original Fuji, but it's
Yeah.
smaller than that. They're small, they're not big.
Yeah, these are bigger fruit than the original. So the original one was smaller, not quite as flat,
Exactly, yeah, that's what it
and
is.
had seeds in it.
It has a lot, but it's pretty sweet and good, but they're small and a lot of seeds.
Yeah, if they don't water enough, so size of fruit on most fruit trees, amount of water, give them number of fruit on the tree. If there's a lot of fruit on the tree, the fruit tends to be smaller. If they don't water enough, the fruit tends to be smaller. But yeah, pretty much the newer Fuyu types are bigger fruited. Well, not all, but these are big fruited. Because you go to the supermarket, they're all smaller than that. We're going, okay, where'd they get those? Because my tree always makes big ones. So.
So what do you mean about berry?
Bare root is when they don't come with a container or any dirt around them, so they just plow the trees out of the ground. They're Fresno every winter. Around December, they plow them out of the ground, and they just ship them without any dirt on them. So we just have a stick with roots, and that's the way most persimmons are planted on farms. They just take those, dig a hole, put them in the ground, put the dirt back. They're planted. So it doesn't take them very long. They said it's like. What they tell us once, when they planted an orchard with bare root trees, like 20 seconds on each tree. Because they have one guy digging the hole, one guy sticks the tree in there, one guy shovels it back, and they keep going down. They work really fast to get those in the ground, so it doesn't take them much time.
But how long does it take if it's a bare root to bear fruit?
This was bare root last January.
This past January of 2018?
Right. Now, typically, you know, if you get a small tree, so this one was this big when we stuck it in here. But if you get one that's got a trunk that's only, say, this thick, it may not make any fruit the first year. You should get fruit the second year. But again, one at my house took, on its 4th year, it got 150 fruit, but it didn't fruit the first 3 years. So you never know. I mean, the thing about plant propagation is the way these are propagated, they take the buds out of the stems of the branches and graft them to the rootstock to make trees. Well, they've always known that the buds from branches near the bottom of the tree take longer to mature than buds taken off the very top of the tree. The top buds tend to flower and fruit, and flower and fruit immediately grow slower. The buds taken off bottom branches tend to grow without fruiting for a while. They're more juvenile. So we never know what we're getting. So now a lot of the bare roots though, you'll see fruit stems hanging on it. So you go, okay, that thing already fruited, so it's probably gonna fruit again. You'll see old fruit stems hanging on the tree, so it had a previous crop. Here's a little fruit stem right here from fruit that had formed there. So if they have a lot of those on there, then you know that they're already mature enough to make fruit.
How about sun? How much sun?
They can get by on very little sun and still fruit and have decent fruit, but you'll get a better crop with the more light. So with any fruit tree, more sun, more fruit, better tasting fruit. But in my house, my persimmon tree stuck. We're in a spot where a pine tree from the green belt grew over it. So it only gets maybe half a day. So it's about, say, 8 foot high and 6 foot wide, still made about 50 or 60 fruit, and they were still good. So, but yeah, they've been good container plants, yes.
So right now, like on that stand, they have fruit already. So since it's fruit the second year, so if it's already fruit, we wanted fruit and we harvested fruit, should we trim it down, the branch?
Well, if you want this tree to stay small, the same size, yeah, after these ripen, you might cut it down to this branch, say.
Just that branch.
Right. But in persimmon orchards, what they say is that the trees tend to produce every other year heavily. Now, the one at my house did. It produced heavy every year. That was the Emoto at my house, produced heavy every year. But what they say is if you've got a lot of fruit on one branch this year, that branch is not gonna fruit the next year, or not much. So they say that if it's got a heavy crop on the tree, they don't prune it much in the winter because they know it's not gonna fruit much anyway. But if they have a tree that did make fruit one year, they prune it back severely because they know it's gonna be overloaded the next year. Now, they do need to have the year-old growth on the tree, so whatever has leaves on it right now, like this would be a more of a typical branch. You need to save a little bit of this branch to get fruit the next year. Whatever grows off this will bloom and make fruit. So don't cut it down to here, because this is now an old branch. You probably won't get any fruit off of that.
I got two persimmon from your backyard. One is 2 years ago from the pot, and I put in the ground, grow well, and they are three very larger than the market, and very sweet, but didn't grow any this year. But the second one I got is Peru this year. It's grown 4, but all faded, did not keep. So I just wondered, is that good to keep in the pot? I use 25 gallon.
They seem to be pretty good in pots. I mean,
I don't know why it didn't grow well.
well, okay, so persimmons are noted for aborting fruit when they're young. So they'll start a lot and fall off when it's half grown. That's a reputation. They tend to abort fruit when they're young. Now the Emoto, we've liked it because it tends not to abort fruit as much as the other ones, but they still abort some of them. I remember I had a it's called black sapote, which is the tropical persimmon. And I had one that was about 15 foot tall and 10 foot wide. It'd have like 300 fruit on there. They got, they look like regular persimmons, but they turn black when they're ripe. They got about that big and they all fell off. Every single one of them fell off, and they did that for 5 years in a row, and they got so angry I just cut it down. And then I had, in my same yard, I had giant fruit persimmons, which are persimmons that grow about this size, about as big as grapefruit. And they would do the same exact thing. Every year they'd make 300 fruit that got as big as these, and they all fall off green in August. And I'd end up with 2 on the trees for like 5 years in a row, so I just chopped them down too. I said, I can't stand this. It's not holding its fruit. But Emoto and it tends to be, that's why we like the Emoto variety, because it tends to hang on to its fruit even when it's young. But a friend of mine said he had a giant fuyu like I had, but theirs was like 25 years old and it was making 100 fruit a year, a little big ones. But I was like 28 at that time. I said, okay, I can't wait that long for this thing to start fruiting, so I cut mine down and kept the Emoto and the Jiro persimmons. A number of years ago, L.A. Cook Nursery introduced Hana Fuyu, which is another giant fruited one. They said this one doesn't abort like the other giant fuyu that was named Gosho in Japan. But they never did grow the trees very well. First, a lot of them died. That was a difficult one to propagate. Anyway, Jurimoto, the regular fuyus. I will mention there is one called the Izu, which we've got ordered. So we should have this one too. Izu, a lot of books say it's better tasting than the other fuyus. I don't know how you can compare it though, because it ripens at least 1 month earlier. So Izu is nice. If you don't have a persimmon, buy either Jiro or Emoto. But if you've got those and you want really like persimmons, you buy Izu, because we picked Izu in August, way before the other persimmons ripen. So the book says 4 or 5 weeks. I don't know. We're picking like 2 months early. I had an Izu in my yard, and the fruit was starting to color up on the 4th of July. We're going, well, this is really early. They tend to be smaller fruits because they don't have time to size up, but they're good. They're seedless. So that's the Izu fuyu type. And I think that's all we're getting this year. There's like 14 different persimmons that can be sold as a fuyu because they're all the same shape. They're all non-astringent. Now, I didn't mention what that means yet. So the other persimmon that's real common is Hapchia, which is shaped more like this. It's got more of a point on it, and that one is astringent till it's dead ripe. And if you want to know what astringent means, you take the driest wine you can think of, and you make it twice as dry or 3 times as dry as that. It's like having, I guess, like alcohol in your mouth, pure alcohol. You put that in your mouth, and your whole mouth feels like it's, all the liquid's gone. You can't talk, you can't swallow, real astringent. When it's dead ripe, almost to a jelly-like texture, then it's really, really good. But until that point, now the nice thing, well, the one thing traditionally in Japan, what they would do is they would found out that you can ripen them overnight, so they're not astringent. If you just take the orange fruit, put it in an empty keg of sake, so the alcohol would ripen overnight. So a friend of mine said, "Oh, this Ziploc bag, a drop of alcohol in the bag with the fruit, zip it up. Next day it's ripe." Apparently the alcohol explodes all the cells, so they are non-astringent or something. In the United States, they found out if you, like the American persimmons, there are persimmons on the eastern half of the United States, and on those, you wait till there's been 2 frosts. So freezing and thawing the cells of the fruit takes out all the astringency. So you can do the same thing. You take the fruit, put it in the refrigerator, freezer, let it thaw, put it in there again, let it thaw, it's ripe.
Wow.
2 frost cycles, it's ripe. Well, even 1 frost cycle can do it. So apparently it explodes, this ice crystals explode the cells inside, and it takes away the astringency. Now, in Japan, there's a lot of folk tales about people who eat persimmons until they explode and die. So in Japan, they're considered, one of the most desirable. I don't know. There's something about persimmons. You can't stop eating them. When you start eating, you can't stop. So they're considered one of those type of foods in Japan. Now the hachia, a dried hachia persimmon, dried the traditional way, is about as good a tasting food as you can ever eat. So I don't like them. I still like them if they're fully ripe. I like them, even though they're really soft and sloppy. They have some texture to them that's real interesting. But dried, that's like heaven on earth. That's about as good a fruit as you can ever eat. Dried hachia persimmon. I think it's called hoshigaki, and you can buy it at some of the Japanese markets in the area. But the process they do to make that stuff is pretty tedious. Something like $8 a pound or something, but it's worth it. It's worth it. So those are your main persimmons. Now this is the chocolate persimmon. And they grow fruit about this big. And they're not astringent, and they do have seeds in them. The seeds cause the flesh to turn brown, cinnamon brown color, and you might say a cinnamon chocolate flavor. So now I still like the regular fuyus better, but a lot of people do like the flavor on the chocolate ones. And to make the seeds, they have to have male flowers. In fact, these are some little tiny male flowers on this branch that recently opened up, probably due to the heat wave we had. Knocked off some foliage on the tip, and they started to make little male flowers. Chocolate persimmon is nice if you want to grow any of the ones that have to be pollinated. So there are a couple. There's one famous one called coffee cake. Chocolate coffee cake, which in Japan is nishimurawase, but it's a little bit more of this shape, with a little bigger fruit, and the flesh is marbled orange and brown. So it's got like a somewhat chocolate flavor mixed in with regular orange flavor. But if this is not pollinated by that, it's totally inedible. So you have to get the chocolate to pollinate it. The other persimmons often don't make male flowers. Chocolate makes a lot of little male flowers, so it can pollinate the other ones that need it. Now, in theory, if you have a chocolate next to a regular seedless persimmon, there's a chance it makes seeds, but we've done that, have not seen seeds in the ones that are supposed to be seedless, so not a big deal. But the coffee cake, if it doesn't have any seeds, you get these big pale orange fruit, never get good. At my house, we had one of these without the chocolate around. That chocolate one died in a rainstorm. At least 100 fruit this big. Looked like it should be really good, just couldn't get them to ripen and get sweet. So without the pollination to make seeds in this, it was inedible.
So the other one, the regular one, like the Emoto and the Izu, you can just have them by are they female? You need to.
There are
know
seedless
female?
females that make fruit without ever being pollinated.
Okay, so by itself, it's a good.
Right, don't need any help at all. So the only one that really needs help, coffee cake. Because the chocolate is self-fertile.
It is possible to graft the hachia on a fuji or
I'm sure it is. Although, I don't know how easy it is, but I'm sure it's possible. Because these are grafted by bud grafts. So,
The reason is I have the fuji and my sister has the hachia. So we were considering on see if we can graft them and have both varieties on the same tree.
Half and half.
February's, end of January, February is the right time to graft.
Okay, January or February?
Either one.
Either one.
That's the time of year. Commercially, what they do is they take branches in January that look good for grafting, and they put them in the refrigerator and they store them until June. They do June grafting. But that's mainly because they have to start a new crop of rootstock every year. So they start the rootstock in January in the ground, and then in June it's big enough for them to graft. Otherwise, when normal people graft trees, they graft them in late January through February when the weather's just starting to warm up. Okay, I think that's all the persimmons we're carrying. Let me see. So we do have coffee cake coming, chocolate coming, hachia, izu, saijo. So there is another one, saijo, which is smaller than hachia, and is also astringent until it's dead ripe. Usually this is the last persimmon you picked. So izu, August, September, Jirimoto, October, hachia, November, chocolate and coffee cake somewhere in the middle there, saijo, December. And saijo is considered the sweetest of all the persimmons. I've got one big one left out there. I've eaten it, it's good, but the fruit is small, so. But that is considered the sweetest of all the persimmons. So the persimmons do need the real good drainage. In 1998, when we had that really wet winter, I think we got 33 inches of rain. The spot where I had been growing my persimmons was underwater for a few months, and they all slowly died. They didn't die that year, but we knew they weren't going to recover, so we had to move them to a different bed that wasn't in the lowest part of our yard. So you do need areas that don't stay too wet. If you have good soil, like, Santa Ana's great soil, flatlands of Tustin, Orange, Buena Park, Anaheim, it's all perfect soil. You don't have to do anything to stick them in the ground. They grow just fine. Ample water for good fruit. Persimmons are fairly drought tolerant too, but if you don't water them, the fruit comes out real small.
When you say ample water,
Yeah, it's nice most of agriculture's gone to daily watering. They know that's more efficient than once a week deeply. The plants don't like that wet, dry. They don't like that. They'd rather be this moist all the way through. And persimmons don't need much fertilizer either. Probably a good mulch layer on the ground is probably good enough for almost all of these.
What kind of mulch do you prefer?
Dead leaves from other plants. So, in nature, dead leaves provide all the nutrition for most plants in nature. So if I'm trimming my hedge, I'll just take the trimmings and put them underneath the trees. It disappears pretty fast, faster than you think it would. 3 or 4 months, they're gone. They're gone.
So not bark mulch.
that's fine, but leaves are more nutritious.
Okay.
I mean, in forests, you know, generally the ground's covered in a deep layer of leaves.
Is the dead leaf from the fruit is better than dead leaf from bush, or no difference?
Well, in nature, the leaves of the tree fall underneath the same tree. That's supposed to be there. So they probably like their home leaves better than someone else's leaves, but I don't know that they matter that much. Because the leaves should have fairly same nutrients, but in nature, you know, most trees drop their leaves underneath themselves. It's gotta be how it works.
If I buy the pot, for instance, a tree, do I have to take it out of that pot?
Eventually. Yeah, that's a little small to get much fruit off of. We had in a whiskey barrel size container, a tree once, a persimmon tree on its second year makes 75 fruit. We hated to sell, we said, this fruit's worth more than we're selling this for. It was as low, we couldn't believe it. It wasn't much taller than that tree, but it was in a bigger half barrel size, it was actually a 28-inch square box that wasn't very tall. 18 inches tall, but which is about the same size as a half barrel. But it was loaded. We couldn't believe it. Second year,
So you call it a whiskey then?
a half barrel. I have a 24-inch box out there that's 20 by 24-inch redwood tub. But the half barrels tend to last over a decade. Better wood. Okay, I think we're done. All right, thank you.
Good class, thank you.